The views expressed on Skeptically Speaking are not necessarily the views of this station, its affiliates, sponsors, or advertisers.
Bring it on! The skeptics await your letter. Your call, tweet, homing, pigeon, whatever. Desiree Shell gonna raise a little hell, metaphorically that is. 'Cause we're skeptically speaking.
Hello and welcome to Skeptically Speaking. I'm your host, Desiree Shell. My guest today is David Weinberger, senior researcher at Harvard's Berkman Center for Internet and Society and co-director of the Harvard Library Innovation Lab. He's also heading the team that's building the Digital Public Library of America. He's the author of several books on the effect of Internet on ideas, the most recent being Too Big to Know, about how the Internet is transforming knowledge and expertise. Welcome back, sir.
Hello, Desiree.
So you've been writing about information and knowledge for a long time now. So are people becoming more or less worried about the effect of knowledge on culture?
Well, it's hard to generalize, but it's one of those things that where you have a serious cultural clash, whether it's in politics, in fact, or in culture, where as it becomes more intense, before it gets settled, the sides get more and more polarized. And to some extent, I think that is happening. So, for example, there is certainly a great deal of growth in the area of open access. That is, scholars and researchers and scientists publishing their work in journals that are openly available to anybody for free. Frequently, these are peer-reviewed, but they are free instead of the $10,000 to $15,000 that libraries pay for. It's crazy, crazy pricing. So that has absolutely been gaining enthusiasm and numbers as well, which personally I think is fantastic. And at the same time, as people see that, the people who are worried about that become more worried. And so the polarization becomes more intense. And I think overall, that's roughly the sort of stage that we're in. Both sides are getting more frightened of the other or more enthusiastic about their own chances.
So there's concerns about the accessibility of information, both the inaccessibility of certain information, but also the idea of information overload. But both of those ideas were sort of worrying people long before the internet, correct?
Yes, although, of course, we didn't call it information overload because we didn't invent information until 1948. And the phrase itself, information overload, comes from the 1960s and initially, and then became popular with the 1970 publication of, what's his name? Future Shock. That's not his name, but it's the name of the book.
Right.
I'm old, so just back off, okay? So Future Shock, very good book, and it took this phrase and made it a part of the culture. It didn't invent it, but it popularized it. But certainly the concept of there being too much information, too much knowledge for any one person to know, that's been with us for a long time. There's a really good book by Ann Blair, Blair, called Too Much to Know, which came out a few months before my own Too Big to Know, so that's a little confusing, but her book's really, really good. And it's about the history of information overload and the idea that, in fact, historically we have at various times quite frequently we have felt that we just can't keep up with everything there is to know.
Well, information overload was almost considered a psychological problem at one point, or at least it was given that kind of gravity, correct? Yeah,
well, that's how it was actually conceived. It was based upon a prior notion that arose in the 1950s called sensory overload, a phrase we still have, and the idea was that too much sensation could overload your circuits, which is language that comes right out of the electrical era. But that's what we were thinking.
Right.
The nervous system is like an electrical system, and you put in too many inputs, and you fry your system, and you fall down, and you twitch, and you foam at the mouth, and you are suffering from sensory overload. Once we invented information, and we entered the information age in 1950s and 60s, somebody said, well, there must be this parallel thing called information overload. And the term started showing up in the 60s, as far as I can tell, if you sort of look through the New York Times index of the from the 1960s, it was used not all that frequently and almost always in a context in which somebody, usually a senator, was trying to scare parents about their children's drug use. And they would suffer information overload, and they would fry their circuits, and they would fall down twitching and foaming at the mouth. And the term has certainly changed its meaning since then. We generally don't think about information overload as an individual problem. We take it more as a feature of the overall environment. There's too much information out there. And frequently when people are complaining about information overload, what they're really complaining about is they're not getting enough information, or at least not the right information. It's a very different idea than our brains will explode if we actually get all this information, and we tend to believe that less. So even though information overload has a long history, not called that exactly, but we've worried for a long time that we wouldn't be able to master everything that there is. It has changed its meaning, I think, in the past 3 decades in substantial ways. And first is the amount of information that we're talking about, because we are now in the networked age talking about just so much more information than we ever imagined. So there's a difference in degree there. There's also a change from the notion of information overload as a personal syndrome to a feature of the environment. And there's a change also that I think is really important in the corresponding notion that goes with information overload. And Clay Shirky has put it, as always, brilliantly about a year ago when he said there's no such thing as information overload, there's only filter failure. And the idea is that in various times we have the sense of too much, but then we just adjust our filters. What's wrong? We always have to filter because there is always too much information, too much sensation, too much knowledge. And so we have filters that reduce it. And if we feel like we're being overloaded, then we'll just adjust our filters. But filters have changed pretty dramatically in the digital age. And I think it's one of the most important things about the digital age, in fact. It used to be that we filtered things out physically, whether it was a publisher who's sorting through the slush pile, as they so ingloriously call the efforts of people to get something into their stupid magazine. So people send them in, and it makes a slush pile, and they filter through them, and only a tiny percentage generally makes it out of the slush pile. Or whether if you are a librarian, you're doing acquisitions, relatively very few books make it onto your shelves. And so filtering in the real world has meant filtering out, where the stuff that doesn't make it through just gets lost. Nobody can find it again. Nobody sees it. If you wanted to find it, you couldn't. You couldn't find the obscure manuscript that somebody submitted and didn't get published. But on the web, on the internet, we don't filter that way. We filter simply by linking to things and then promoting the link, whether it's on your blog or you're tweeted or whatever. And when you do that, all that you're doing is you're reducing the number of clicks that it takes for your reader to get to that source. So you put the link on your blog and you say, you got to read this, or here are the 10 best things written this week, or whatever. And now your readers just have to click with tiny little motion of their finger. They can click and they're getting that source. But everything else that you did not filter in is still entirely available and will show up on somebody else's blog or the next Google search. And so on the web, we filter forward. We don't filter out. And that completely changes the topology, the shape of the knowledge landscape, the power relations, the control, what it means to know, our sense of mastery, or rather the inability to master the structure of knowledge itself, all gets changed by that.
I would ask you if that is a positive or a negative change, but I have a feeling you're going to say it's complicated.
Well, it's really very simple, Desiree. You see, no, it's really complicated.
Sir.
Of course it's complicated, because besides all the things we would have to consider, we no longer agree about what the fundamental value or values of knowledge are, which is quite typical when we have one of these deep sorts of changes. And it's deep because we no longer value the same things as we did before. And so the conversation is completely cross purposes when you try to do the comparison.
We have a number of questions. This is an email from Michael.
Is it true that the internet is physically changing the way we think? Not only our attention spans, but our actual cognitive processes?
Well, so the cheap answer to that is yes, everything changes the way we think. That's the point of brains. They're all adaptive, right? Everything, every input, so to speak, changes your brain. So I would love to slither out of the question that way. There is some evidence, it's disputed as these things are, about what it means that there are, in fact, structural changes to how we think. And I think many of us experience something like that. I know my attention span is far worse than it was, and I find myself being engaged, trying to get something done and getting distracted. I don't know how to evaluate the evidence. I'm not a scientist. I also, however, worry about how we, not Michael in this question, but what we're making of this experiential change that many of us notice, that we don't get to where we're going on the web because something else interesting popped up.
Right.
So we could put it in terms of a change in brain structure, or maybe we should, I don't know. But we could also say, so I'll put it as far differently as I possibly can, which is to say, aha, you know what? The internet has revealed? It has revealed that the world is way more interesting than we thought it was. Wow, there's a lot of interesting stuff there. I'm at point A, I'm trying to get to point B because I have a question or whatever, I have some work to do. And before I can get to B, 50 different interesting things have assailed me. I just don't know. I don't know if that's a difference in my brain structure or whether we should say it's a difference in how the world is accessible to us now. I sort of like the other way of putting it, not the brain, but the world way, because A, I think it captures something true to our experience, and B, because I think it's important for us to be careful not to think about this purely in terms of physiology, especially when the causality of brain physiology is so poorly understood and maybe poorly conceptualized. I mean, I am as far from a brain scientist as one can get, so I don't have a right to have an opinion. It doesn't stop me, but I don't have a right to one at all.
We'll get to one more question right now. This is from the chat from Vitor.
It's been said that we were first in a wisdom-based society, then intelligence-based, then information-based, and lately I've been thinking we're moving into a data-based society. Is this characterization apt?
It seems like there's an implicit value scheme in here. Mm-hmm. That wisdom is, the golden age, and then you move through the various metals until you're down to the tin or plastic of data. And that sort of mythology is so common that it makes you think that it's a brain structure as well. We seem to always, at least, not just in the West, but we always seem to think that we are descending from ages that were far wiser, golden ages. That's a fairly cross-cultural sort of myth. I don't buy it. Actually, I'll take the quizzicalness out of my voice. I don't buy that. Outside of the values, I'll come back to why I don't buy it in a second, but outside of the value part of it, it does seem, I'll leave wisdom out of it because I don't even know what wisdom is, but it does seem as if we have new terms being introduced. So we've had knowledge in various forms in the West for 2,500 years, information in anything like its current meaning. I really want to insist, started around 1948. Most people don't agree with me on this. They think the history of the concept of information is quite continuous. I sort of don't think that's right. So we have this new term, information, and then we have the new term or new sense of the term, data. Data also has a long history, but it meant something very, very different. Again, in the 1950s, we get the sense of data. And yeah, data is becoming more important than it ever was. And it also has pretty thoroughly changed its character just in the past 5 years, which is sort of astounding as well. But here's why I don't agree with the value progression, that the old-timey was good and now it's the tin of data. You ask anybody who's in a field in which she or he is concerned with knowledge, that's almost everybody, but take somebody who's a researcher or a scientist or an educator or a writer or, et cetera, et cetera. You have to search, you have to find the most sort of contrarian curmudgeon to find anybody who says, yeah, the internet is making my work as a knower harder, worse. I'm worse off now with the internet.
Interesting.
I'm not going to have it. Take it out of my office. I'm going to sit and I'm just going to read books. There isn't anybody. Well, I mean, there's going to be a handful, but there are a handful. Everybody else is rejoicing in the good stuff that the internet does for people who are seeking knowledge. So if you want to assign sort of metallic ages, when is the best time to be a knower? It's now. There are other problems with knowledge, but if you are in the knowledge business, so to speak, it seems indisputable to me that this is by far the best time to be somebody who is concerned with or who loves knowledge. So I'm sorry, I'm talking too much. Let me just give you two reasons why. The first is obvious, which is the accessibility of information, knowledge, wisdom, data, all that stuff, which is just astounding, even from what we thought was possible 10 years ago. But the other is the shape of knowledge. So when knowledge was paper-based, when we were writing it down, which is basically the beginning of knowledge, it's the ancient Greeks, and that's when literacy was happening, and we were starting to write things down. And we've had 2,500 years of knowledge that assumes that its medium is paper. Paper's wonderful, but it leads to a certain type of knowledge, a particular way of knowing, which is not the only way that knowledge can be. When knowledge moves to the internet, as it already, to a large degree, it already has, then knowledge takes on a new shape, and that shape is the shape of networks. So knowledge now, it seems to me, exists in these networks of people and pages and ideas and resources that are connected through links and through human conversation and human contextualization. One person linking to another site and saying why, disagreeing or agreeing, and other people linking in and out and all around, and you get these incredibly messy webs of people who, some of whom are credentialed experts, and we could not do without them, but some of them are people who have a fresh perspective from another field, who are idiots and don't know anything. You have all sorts of people who, for whatever reason, are explaining it at every level of expertise. These webs have value because of the differences and disagreements among the people who are creating them. And that is such a different idea of knowledge than the old one, the old paper-based one, which said that knowledge is the distillation. When we've settled all the issues and we feel confident enough, then we write it down and then it's knowledge. But at that point, it's dead knowledge. It's settled and finished and done. Now knowledge lives in these vibrant, self-contradictory, messy webs. It's a very different idea of knowledge.
You're listening to Skeptically Speaking. I'm here with David Weinberger, senior researcher at Harvard's Berkman Center for Internet and Society and co-director of the Harvard Library Innovation Lab. He's the author of Too Big to Know. Now, this different idea of knowledge that you keep talking about, we've seen that happen in various different places, and even the structure of arguments has changed over the years. Because at one point, you write in your book that facts weren't even all that important at one time. And I'm thinking specifically of the section you wrote about children working in factories.
Oh, yeah, the good old days, the golden era. Anybody who ever doubts, and we all do at times, we doubt that we were making progress, that in fact maybe we think we're going in the other direction, just has to think about chimney sweeps and dentists to be convinced that no, we're way better off now even 100 years later than we were. So facts in the sense in which we think about them have a very recent history. That for most of Western history, the idea of knowledge, to know something was to know it beyond what animals could know. And what animals can know is what they can sense. They can get information through their sense organs, and that's fine. And that's of particulars or of facts, factual things. But the idea was that's what the animals do. What the humans do, which is especially important and especially valuable, of course, is that we can see past the facts, past the particulars to the universals. And so knowledge, the object of knowledge were universal principles, and by the time of Francis Bacon, it was universal theories, but facts were demeaning. It's what your cat can see. Knowledge was something higher. It was only in the 19th century that we started to look at facts as a really important primary component of knowledge. I mean, Bacon introduced it earlier, but it was in Victorian England that we started to use facts as a way of beating down the justifications by assumed morality
Right.
for oppressing, for the incredible class differences, which had some people being very rich and sitting in their lounges by their fireplaces, and other people shoving their 8-year-old children up into the flues to scrape out the soot. And the upper classes thought that was fine because it's actually good for the kids and they enjoy it. And if they didn't do that, they'd be out picking pockets and drinking like their old man. And so we're doing them a favor, and God's will is being served by this. Against that, in the 19th century, some social reformers said, rather than just assuming this moral justification, we could actually look at the facts. We could see what's going on. Are chimney sweep children actually living to ripe old ages, or are there some medical? And so the age of facts as a way of countering selfishness, human interest that was justifying all sorts of horrible behavior, the age of facts began. It's very, very recent, though.
So now they made the blue books, and blue books were books of facts about different topics, and they were mainly designed to allow the government to base their policy decisions on, as you said, fact. So that sounds lovely. So is that anywhere similar to the way that policy decisions are made now?
Well, in theory, sure.
Great.
As we all know, that all of our policy decisions in this country are made on the basis of pure fact and a lack of self-interest. Both parties get together and they look at the facts, and they see that even though perhaps they had campaigned one way or another, but that they had made a mistake. And so on the basis of these facts, they disavow their own policies, and we get these overwhelming majorities of people who are looking at the facts, voting the same way to make the best possible policies. Because that's how facts work.
I love your world, sir, and I want to live there desperately.
Yeah, me too. So this actually, I think, makes a really important point. Your question does about facts. The hope that was held out to us was that if we all just paid more attention to the facts, we would all come to agreement. There's this quote from Daniel Patrick Moynihan that you hear all over the place, and it was quite a brilliant quote. It's everybody's entitled to his own opinion, but not his own facts. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the reasons people like this quote is that it holds out a promise that if, in fact, we do agree to submit ourselves to the facts, then we will all come to agreement. The current political situation, but even more obviously, if you just go out on the internet for about 5 minutes, you'll see that it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. We have access to more facts now than we ever did. We possibly have less agreement now than we ever did. Certainly the political polarity in this country, in the U.S., is worse than I've ever seen it in my 61 years. Not getting better, it's getting worse, yet we have more facts and we have more access to them. So apparently the idea that facts will bring us together is a false idea. Now, this is not to say that all facts are equal. They're not. There are bunches of things that people believe that are simply wrong. So I'm not saying believe what you want. What I'm saying is the idea that a focus on facts will bring us together. No, we now know for sure that that's not going to happen.
Have we always disagreed this much, and we're just now seeing it because of the internet, because it is so public? Or has the internet and all its random information created that disagreement in a sense?
It's probably a bit of both. It's very hard to get data about this because it's a comparative to before the internet. And as far as I know, we don't have the studies that would show that. But we can guess. So on the one hand, yes, it does seem as very likely that the internet, because it's open to all, because the filtering there isn't anybody filtering out, which for me is a wonderful thing that there isn't anybody filtering out. But because there isn't, we now hear the voices that otherwise in the old print and broadcast days, we just wouldn't have heard. So few people could get a book published or get on air that you didn't hear the marginalized voices, and now we do. It also seems, and there's a lot of controversy about the following, but it also seems likely that having access to what at least purport to be facts and the ability to find others who confirm your own beliefs, even when they're crazy, crazy beliefs. I don't know, but I'm going to take a guess that yes, that has resulted in an even greater polarity and divergent and diversity and the number of people who are crazily wrong.
Crazily wrong.
Yeah, there are bunches of them. And every one of them disagrees with me. How did that happen?
You're listening to Skeptically Speaking. I'll be right back with David Weinberger, author of Too Big to Know, after this.
Skeptically Speaking wants you to question everything. To be a part of the discussion, call and record your question on our listener question line at Speak 73101. That's 773-257-3101. Long-distance charges may apply. Sunday nights at 6 Mountain Time, join our Ustream chat room to listen and ask questions as we record interviews live. Just click the Listen Online button at skepticallyspeaking.com. You can also email your questions and comments to live@skepticallyspeaking.com, or if you're on Twitter, tweet us at Skeptical Radio. To find out where Skeptically Speaking airs near you, to listen to past episodes, or download the weekly podcast, check out our website at skepticallyspeaking.com. While you're there, follow the links to connect with us on our Facebook page, our Twitter feed, or to subscribe to the show in iTunes. And now, back to the show.
Welcome back to Skeptically Speaking. I'm your host, Desiree Schell. Today I'm talking with David Weinberger, senior researcher at Harvard's Berkman Center for Internet and Society and co-director of the Harvard Library Innovation Lab. He's the author of Too Big to Know, which is a fantastic book. Now, speaking of books, we used to be able to look at books and decide that they were credible because the authors were experts. Not necessarily because they wrote a book, but because they had some kind of institutional credibility behind them. But you say that the internet is changing the idea of what an expert is.
Well, sure. I mean, the obvious part of it, I think everybody knows, is that you no longer need the credential in order to be able to offer your opinion, and that some of those opinions that are offered are incredibly valuable. And some of them are, but some of them are. And we come up with better and better ways of identifying the value of particular contributions. So that's huge. I mean, that's hugely transformatively important. But there's something else going on that I think is at least as big when it comes to experts. So the old idea of experts was actually a response to our long time recognition that the world is, if I may, too big to know. Yep, it was a plug.
Nice.
Nicely done. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Pretty smooth. Eh? So the strategy for a long time, for thousands of years, for dealing with this fact of the bigness of the world and the smallness of our cranium, was to reduce what there was to know through a variety of tactics. And one of the most important was to enable experts to break off a brain-sized chunk of the world and know that chunk really thoroughly. Experts are awesome. But that doesn't scale. It just, you only have so many experts and so many chunks of the world, and you want to get everything. It doesn't scale. Now we can scale that expertise. So we still have experts, and I hope we always will, who have an amazingly deep and rich and wise understanding of some relatively small field. But they now exist in conversation, in webs, in networks. This is the networking of knowledge, the networking of expertise. So an expert who simply knows things and spouts, you don't even come across them all that much anymore. Because if they do, somebody pushes back. The person may not want to be in a web of conversation, but too bad. They post something on the web and they do it in full confidence. I am the expert, and they may well be. Nevertheless, if anybody pays attention, they're going to be posting back at them and linking, and these webs will grow up. So experts now are in webs whether they want to or not. And in the best of circumstances, which we come across all the time, experts are engaged with one another, with other credentialed experts, uncredentialed, with lay people who have good intentions or bad, in very public ways. We have so many different ways of doing this now, including old school ways like mailing lists, which somebody like me, I like mailing lists a lot, but there's all the social networking stuff, the Twitter and the Facebook and the Google Plus, and there's so many different places and ways in which people cohere around an idea and spread the idea and add to it and sometimes detract from it. And these webs, which contain experts and non-experts, are more valuable than even the experts themselves. Because these webs take their ideas, the experts' ideas, and poke at them and extend them and try them out in new areas and ask questions. These webs have more value than the individual experts. And these webs are exactly where knowledge has moved.
Well, so why exactly is that idea of diversity within that web so important to the idea of knowledge?
Well, it's important because first of all, because it's so different from the old idea of knowledge. The old idea of knowledge was that if there are significant people who are disagreeing with it, then we don't yet know it. It's only when every reasonable person or reasonable and competent person has agreed that we say, yes, now we know that. And of course, we've known for a long time that in the phrase reasonable and competent person, that's where the magician puts her card up her sleeve. We rule out those who disagree. We marginalize those who disagree, often because they're just wrong, but also sometimes because of the inevitable cultural, gender, and the rest of the different biases that we can never fully escape. So knowledge was that which was settled and done. But knowledge is never really settled and done because we're human beings and everything we know and understand occurs within a context that is fully human, including it's personal, it's social, it's cultural, it's history, it's historic, it's linguistic, it's human. And so our idea of knowledge now is actually a far more accurate and realistic one, I think. So first point is this type of knowledge that is unsettled, that is very different from the old. It's the diametric opposite of the old view. And why is it good to have unsettled knowledge that is being discussed and argued? Well, first of all, because I think everybody at this point knows and understands that diversity, in fact, enhances knowledge. A group of people who are all alike, a bunch of white men who are deciding things, get lots of things wrong. That's the first point. And second of all, it's a better reflection of what knowledge itself is. Human beings are very limited creatures with unbelievable ambitions when it comes to knowledge. We want to know how the universe started. We want to understand everything, which is our glory. There's no doubt. But that ambition so far exceeds our grasp. And every scientist knows this. Scientists are the least arrogant in terms of knowledge. They're the least arrogant people around. They talk about hypotheses and theories. They talk about evidence. They don't even talk about facts. They talk about evidence. They understand that all of knowledge is probabilistic because it's infected with the disease that is humanity, that is the finiteness that is humanity. That's where we are. And so knowledge that is based in a network that is always at odds with itself is not only better knowledge, because diversity is good for knowledge, it's also more human knowledge.
Well, that messiness and uncertainty, you're right, I can completely understand why it's very good for knowledge. On the other hand, the fact that a lot of these processes are now taking place in a more public sphere, like the internet, that lack of consensus is often confusing for people who aren't familiar with the process.
It's confusing for everyone. Right. I mean, it is. But the confusion, there's a confusion that is pathological, and we need to not be paralyzed by. But there's also a confusion that is integral to the process. So the confusion that's pathological comes from a discomfort with confusion or discomfort with ambiguity, that we have to nail it down before we can act. If that's the case, we have two choices. We never act, or we delude ourselves into thinking that we've nailed things down. The more mature and I think wiser, so I am using the wise term, I think the wiser and more mature attitude, which is fully available to us on the net, is one of the options for dealing with this confusion, is to say, you know what, it's the best we can do. And so we have to make some choices. Let's make them as well as we possibly can. Let's be prepared to engage around those choices, to defend them. Let's be willing to change those choices if it turns out that as best as we can tell, we were wrong. That's always where we should have been. And the quest for knowledge that exceeds that was always an illusory quest.
We have a question from the chat from Saul.
With regard to critical thinking skills, i.e. the process of determining the more valid argument, what advice would you give to people of different ages, such as children, teens, or adults? And
I'm assuming he means on the internet.
It's a great question. I don't have a great answer. Howard Rheingold has a book that just came out, and I cannot remember the name of it. So this is the second
You're going to get in trouble.
Yeah. First one I had the title, not the name. But it's easy to find. Howard Rheingold, Rheingold. And it's exactly about improving critical thinking skills on the net. So I'm not sure what to tell people of different ages. I think that all that I would say is that this educating ourselves and our children to be better at doing this is, in fact, essential, is critical. I hope that we soon get to the point where schools do not say, and you may use only 2 internet sources for this report, as if we're going to grow up and not be using the internet for all of our sources, because we already do. You and I do, for sure. Of course we do. So rather than limiting the number of sources, have them bring in as many sources as they possibly can and start from the earliest possible age to helping them to see, to understand as best as they can why this page is a relatively good source and that one isn't.
So what does all of this, everything that we've been talking about, what does it mean for the concept of knowledge? Sorry, big question.
Yeah. I'm very hopeful about the progress of understanding our world. There is not a better time to be alive. And the difference between before and after the internet is exponential in terms of research and study. So that's I think, a very positive side. There's a whole bunch of negatives, some of which we've talked about. The ability to go wrong is it's easier to be an idiot now than ever before. It's also easier to be really knowledgeable and smart, but it's very easy to go wrong, to be convinced that you're going wrong, and to spread your wrongness as if it were truth. So there are lots and lots of very serious issues, but it is a really great time to be knowing. The thing is, I'm not sure that the concept of knowledge, as we currently understand it, is really going to matter. So it's going to come out wrong, but I don't think the concept of knowledge is going to matter to the next generations the way that it did to the prior. Where let me be specific and clear, if I can be, that the concept of knowledge I have in mind is that knowledge is a set of content that has gone through a set of filters, that has been approved and posted in the big book of knowledge, whether it's a museum or a library or wherever. But it's that the old idea that we were engaged in this human task of carefully winnowing ideas and coming up with the content called knowledge. I don't know that idea is going to maintain itself. And if it turns out that we instead build robust networks of knowledge in which ideas are represented and argued over and taken as probabilistic to one degree or another, and people are fully engaged in across multiple every strata, and ideas are pulled from one web into another one that seems to have nothing to do with it. If that's where we end up, then knowledge isn't so much a content. It is what happens in these networks. And if that's the case, then I won't mind losing the old idea of knowledge as the eternal content.
What about those truly, what did you call them? The crazy wrong ideas. Those will continue to exist. So is there any way to, with the filters that you spoke of, how do we filter them forward and the crazy wrong ideas not?
Well as we can. And you can look at the short history of the web as you can see most of it by looking at it in terms of our approach to that very question. How do we find what is of value and how do we propagate it? We have so many ways of doing that now. None of them work perfectly. All of them get overwhelmed at one point or another by too much content or too many spammers or crazy people. And so we come up with a different set of techniques. And I think that's going to be our lot forever. I don't know, but it's certainly plausible that we will never find a system that does for an open internet what the old system did for closed libraries of paper. That old system had a technique for identifying what it thought was of value and of excluding everything else. That worked great we excluded a whole lot of stuff that we're all should be sorry that we did, but that was the price we paid. I'm not at all convinced that the web will succeed by getting back to that old model, but doing it in a webby way. That is, coming up with sources and authorities that have the same sort of known credibility as in the old system. So it may be that we don't succeed in that way, that we succeed only by having better and better filters that do a better but always imperfect job of enabling us to find that which is worthy of belief.
Nicely put, sir. And David, lovely to have you back on the show. Thanks very much for being here.
It's always wonderful to be here, Desiree. Thank you.
We've included a link to David Weinberger, author of Too Big to Know, on our website at skepticallyspeaking.com. And we'll be right back to talk about the fight for an open, accessible internet in Canada with Lindsey Pinto, Communications Manager of OpenMedia.ca, right after this.
On the next episode of Skeptically Speaking, we're joined by Maggie Kurth-Baker, science editor at Boing Boing, to talk about her new book, Before the Lights Go Out, Conquering the Energy Crisis Before It Conquers Us. Maggie will discuss the economics and social incentives that spurred the growth of our existing energy system, and what we can do to prepare for a new energy future. That's next week on Skeptically Speaking, on your local radio station, or online at skepticallyspeaking.com.
I'm here with Lindsey Pinto, Communications Manager of OpenMedia.ca. She's attempting to put Canada on the map as a leader in net neutrality, fair copyright, and the effective use of independent media for political communication. So tell us about Open Media.
Well, Open Media is a national nonprofit organization in Canada that seeks to safeguard the possibilities of the open and affordable internet. So that means doing things like making sure that the internet is open, that there aren't any vested interests at play in blocking online content or suppressing certain kinds of online content or dissuading people from seeing certain kinds of online content, and making sure that it's accessible and affordable for people all across the country and indeed throughout the world, and really just making sure that Canada serves as a leader and has a very strong digital economy going forward. So, in a nutshell, that's what we do at OpenMedia.ca, and we do it through engaging citizens in online issues and making sure that policymaking is participatory.
These are all issues that are close to my heart. So the biggest one right now that you're working on is Bill C-30. So maybe can you explain that a bit?
Yeah, essentially, Bill C-30 is what is called lawful access, which essentially means that the government can force ISPs, or internet service providers, to give out information about you. So under lawful access, without a warrant, government authorities, or authorities in general in Canada, they're not really defined, authorities can go to an internet service provider and ask for your name, email address, telephone number, IP address, which is really key, and I'm going to get back to that, and local service identifier number. Essentially, this means that with your IP address combined with all of this other information, authorities, meaning the police or CSIS, which is our CIA, essentially can track what Canadians are doing online, track how they're using online communication and content online, and basically see who they're talking to. And our major concern as an organization that fights for the open and affordable internet is making sure that the internet doesn't become a really closed and paranoid space where people are afraid to communicate and afraid to learn and afraid to share knowledge and culture. Anything that might be controversial could easily make you the target of an investigation, which is not always a good place for someone to be. And we are indeed very concerned that this is what this will do, not to mention the very clear violation of privacy rights and civil liberties. That's just an aside. And the tremendous cost to Canadians in terms of implementing this kind of registry, this unsecured data registry of our information.
So what was Open Media's response?
We got angry. Essentially, during the election, the Conservative government, which is government empowered now, had in their platform that they were going to pass the quote-unquote remaining crime bills. And this was last year. And among the remaining crime bills were, a huge number of crime bills. Included in that was lawful access. And we started a petition that before the bills were even tabled in Parliament, got about 60,000 signatures, got 60,000 Canadians who were upset about the concept of warrantless online spying coming back. And so that kind of collective pressure and that collective outrage did a number on the government, and they left online spying out of the package of bills that they passed right at the beginning of when government resumed after the summer. So essentially, the public pressure began to work right away. People were very angry right away, and we kind of harnessed that energy. We had people doing things like making videos that went viral where everyday expectations of privacy were violated. We had the petition was CCing members of parliament the whole time, and people just doing a really good job spreading the word. And of course, this kind of hit a peak later on when the bills were tabled in parliament. And our public safety minister, Vic Taves, made the horrendous mistake of saying that when it comes to these bills, you either side with government or you side with the child pornographers.
And actually that turned into a Twitter campaign as well, didn't it? It
did. So we told our supporters to go out and be creative, and they came back with something that we could never in millions of years have imagined, which was the hashtag #TellVicEverything. So there were people tweeting at our public safety minister, Vic Taves, with mundane details of their personal lives, telling them that they had toast for breakfast or waffles was more often the case, because apparently we eat very well here. And just basically drawing attention to the invasive and excessive nature of these bills. The hashtag that they were using on Twitter, #TellVicEverything, became a trending hashtag worldwide on Twitter for a period of time, and for quite a while in Canada, and it's still very active. And now we're seeing a similar set of laws being introduced in the UK, and today there was a story in, I believe it was The Guardian, about how they are using the minister over there, tell him everything.
Fantastic.
So yeah, we're really pleased that model is exportable, and that we were able to have such a strong effect on our own government in terms of, putting political pressure, putting the citizenry together in a state of mutual or basically widespread dissent against warrantless online spying, that this was the kind of thing that the rest of the world is now looking to. We're really, really proud of this community that we built, largely because of the Stop the Meter campaign, which I believe we're talking about a little bit later. Yeah, so we built this huge community, and this community is now being very active and acting as the internet's very own immune system. And we're really excited about the possibilities there, and about how far we've already come in terms of making sure that this bill is pushed back. Of course, the bill isn't, it's still been tabled in Parliament. It's on pause right now, but it could come back at any time. There are rumors that it'll come back before Parliament breaks for the summer. So we are, needing to stay vigilant on this.
Well, how about Stop the Meter? Because that was a great campaign.
Stop the Meter was a great campaign. That was our first really big one, and it turned my job into something that I'd never expected when I started working for OpenMedia.ca, which was at a point when we were a very small organization. We had fought for net neutrality and done very well with that, but at that time we thought that 10,000 people was a lot. And now that we have a 600,000 strong pro-internet community that is engaged in internet issues and is fighting for the digital future, that seems, it's so amazing that we came from that in only a period of a few months. So Stop the Meter essentially was this campaign where a big telecom company in Canada, Bell, which is one of a handful of companies that control the internet in Canada, was seeking to implement a price system that would essentially mean that usage-based billing or caps on your internet use would be imposed across the market in Canada, which means that any ISP would have to charge them to Canadians, and that they would necessarily be fairly large because of the way that Bell has a stranglehold on its competition. Essentially, Canadians got very angry with this because it meant that, A, the internet was going to cost more in an area where Canadians are already paying some of the highest prices in the industrialized world for internet service. It would mean more market concentration in a place where Canada has some of the worst concentration in terms of telecommunications and media ownership in the world, more than twice that of the United States. And it would mean that people who are in rural and remote regions in Canada, people who who didn't have as much money in Canada, but people in lower economic classes would be less able to access the internet, and it would be made unaffordable. which also means that online innovation would suffer. That means that small business owners who really depend on people just being able to browse freely would lose a huge audience. It meant that media would be less accessible because that takes up more bandwidth. Essentially, this would have meant a big stopping point for the open and affordable internet that we together have been building across the world, and it would mean that Canada was left out of the world's digital future. So we started this really small petition. I made a meter graphic in Photoshop in about 20 minutes, which is now everywhere. Really wish I had gotten a graphic designer to do it. But we created this petition, and it went viral. Somebody posted it on Reddit one day, and we got 40,000 people immediately. And soon it grew and grew and grew and grew, and there was pressure put on our media regulator, the CRTC, through the, at the time, Industry Minister Tony Clement, who was one of the targets of the petition, who was receiving, a lot of mail, who was seeing a lot of press about this from our supporters and from basically anybody who they could reach. And the CRTC was essentially sent back to the drawing board on this. They were told, don't come back until you have a plan that puts affordability in the picture and that makes sure that Canadian internet users will continue to be able to browse on an open and affordable internet. So, we really saw this instance where citizen power kind of translated into media power, translated into political power, pushed our media regulator to do something that created a major structural change in the industry, and in an industry that really just affects the way that we communicate amongst ourselves. So this was really huge in terms of using the internet to save the internet. And now we're kind of pushing forward. The CRTC has changed these rules after a series of hearings in the summer. And while the changes aren't perfect, they do have a framework that we are greatly in favor of, and that we essentially have a lot more room to tweak now. So we're really, really happy with the way that turned out.
There's one more campaign that I want to talk about, Stop the Squeeze.
So Stop the Squeeze is our complicated campaign.
Exactly.
Canadians pay some of the highest prices for cell phones in the world as well, and mobile internet is becoming increasingly crucial for cell phone providers. So there's this auction that the government is holding for this type of spectrum, which is airwaves, the things that mobile phones use to access the internet. There was an auction for spectrum that was freed up from our transition from analog TV signals to digital that would essentially be really high quality, that would allow mobile providers to provide new ranges of services, the kind of services that won't get blocked by basement walls, which is generally undesirable, and to essentially make the mobile market more competitive in Canada. We were hoping that the government would institute set-asides for smaller competitors. So in Canada, we have the big three cell phone companies, which is Bell, Rogers, and TELUS, which have essentially a monopoly over the cell phone market in Canada, with the exception of a few small providers that were created actually in the 2008 Spectrum auction due to set-asides. So we were pushing really strongly for set-asides to come into this auction as well, or for some measures to come into this auction to make sure that those independent competitors would survive and that we could bring even more competition into Canada's cell phone market. Right. And right now, essentially, the big three control 94% of the cell phone market. If you have a cell phone in Canada, you are probably with the big three. I'm with the big three,
right?
And I actively fight against it. So, it's really hard to get away. But so essentially, we translated this complicated issue into this idea of big telecom providers trying to squeeze their independent competitors out of the market. And people, saw that would be a problem for the prices of cell phones. They saw that it would be a problem for the fact that, with a lack of competition means you have a lack of rules in our environment. So without competition, big telecom can do things like have really disrespectful customer service or squeeze you into really tight contracts. And so this idea that, unfettered rule of big telecom would be a hugely problematic thing in Canada and in general, really, made this issue very accessible for Canadians who signed the petition at stopthesqueeze.ca, who, did graphics, who spent a lot of time on Twitter, and essentially, their pressure the end result ended up being a half measure, essentially, from Industry Canada, where they announced rules that involved caps on how much Big Telecom could buy in terms of spectrum. So it wasn't quite the model that we were looking for, but it was still a somewhat acceptable model. But Canadians are keeping their eyes on it. The auction isn't scheduled until the end of this year. Sorry, the beginning of next year. It used to be the end of this year. So we're going to be keeping an eye, and essentially if we see competition decrease, if we see prices go up, then we will know who to blame. And we will continue with the fight for cell phone affordability in Canada and for competition.
I find that very few Canadians are at all aware of these issues. As you said, the spying made it into the news, but the other problems aren't really getting much attention. Why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, a lot of these problems are very complicated, and Big Telecom does put a lot of effort into trying to frame them as being very complicated. There's a lot of work being done by lobbyists from these big industries that essentially tries to say that Canadians don't know what we're talking about when we're asking for more competition. We don't know what we're talking about when we're asking for more affordability. And they try to just push the matter aside, being like, we are industry, we know best. Let us be the people to talk to politicians and policymakers. Let us deal with it. You'll be fine. Just let's back off, guys.
That always works so well.
It does, and it is really irritating. But essentially, I mean, we have this growing engaged community. We have a very wide range of people in this community. So in our pro-internet community, we have people who do things like share a campaign on Twitter or to tell somebody to sign a petition. And then we also have people who are lawyers and write really, really in-depth policy pieces. I mean, there is around 100-page brief, if you can call it that, on the online spying bills that came from one of our supporters who works for the BC Civil Liberties Association. And so, we have tools like that. We have online video makers who create videos that make the issues really accessible and really, really visceral for Canadians who wouldn't otherwise get that, making sure that 700 megahertz spectrum is available for independent competitors in the cell phone market means something along the lines of making sure that cell phone access, which is really the future of the internet and the future of communications in Canada, is made available to any kind of Canadian, no matter where they live, no matter what their stripe, no matter how much money they make, because it is an essential service at this point.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, we're seeing such a huge variety of information coming from Canadians. And this is really just the beginning of the pro-internet community. We at OpenMedia.ca, we've been around for years, but we have really hit our stride in the last about a year now that we've had a community this large. And we're seeing the community continue to grow. We're seeing really, really creative stuff come out of them, and really in-depth analyses. And it's because of people like that who are able to participate and who know all about the idea of using the internet to save the internet, which is something I realize I've said before in this program, means that we can come together and we can engage in participatory policy making. We can essentially take the internet back from these big telecom companies that just really want to make more money, that, they aren't evil, but they are self-interested and they will put their bottom line before the interests of Canadians. And we are becoming a force to stop that.
So how can people help? Because you have a lot of help, but I assume you need more.
We always need more, and we at OpenMedia.ca, and I've been putting a lot of emphasis on what our supporters have done, because we are 3 full-time employees. We have a very small office. We get on each other's nerves. We work late hours, and we need all the help we can get. So, if you want to volunteer for us, we would love that. If you want to translate things for us, because Canada is bilingual and we have an Anglophone staff, unfortunately, that is helpful. If you want to donate to us, openmedia.ca/donate. Or become an OpenMedia.ca ally. We have a bunch of people who give monthly donations who really make up the bulk of why we can continue our work and make plans going forward. That is very helpful to us. But essentially, if you don't know open media is necessarily, if this is the first time you're hearing about it, I would just ask that you visit our site, www.openmedia.ca. Learn a little bit about what we do, read our latest news, our blog entries, sign up for a mailing list, and start to kind of learn about our work and about how important it is that we maintain a free and democratic communication system, and make sure that that communication system involves an open and affordable internet.
Well, you guys do phenomenal work, and thanks for that on behalf of the interneted masses, of which I am one. You can find out more about Open Media's work and how to get involved at OpenMedia.ca. And we've also linked to it on our site at skepticallyspeaking.com. You'll also find links to Facebook, Twitter, and Google+, and to iTunes, where you can subscribe to the show, listen to past episodes, or leave a bright and shiny review. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week on Skeptically Speaking.
Bring it on, the skeptics await your letter. Your call, tweet, homing, pigeon, whatever. Desiree Shell gonna raise a little hell, metaphorically that is. 'Cause we're skeptically speaking.